When people around the country hear the words Groundhog Day, they probably think of Pennsylvania's Punxsutawney Phil. But here on Staten Island, borough residents have come to rely on their own furry friend, who has proven to be even more accurate in predicting future weather forecasts. Welcome to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene, a podcast bringing you an inside look at the biggest stories on Staten Island with the reporters who cover them. I'm your host, Erik Bascome, and this week I'm joined by Staten Island Advance Multimedia Specialist Jason Paderon to discuss the annual Groundhog Day ceremony at the Staten Island Zoo, starring the one and only Staten Island Chuck. Thanks for joining me today, Jason. You know, for our listeners who don't know, you're usually the one behind the scenes on the podcast. You're filming, you're recording, you're doing all of the editing and the logistical stuff. But, you know, today we have you on the other side of the mic. So what's that kind of been like for you?
Well, obviously it wasn't planned. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone and shaved my mustache the way I did. I tried to do this little Negan thing, and it started to be a little bit more Borat. But
oh my god!
But I'm normally doing a lot of nitpicking in terms of making sure that it's aiming in the right direction, and it's going to drive me crazy throughout this thing. So we're kind of hoping for the best.
Yeah, you're going to be on double duty this time. You're going to be here talking, doing the podcast, and then editing and putting together the podcast, so it's going to be a lot of work for you on you know, in that regard. But I'm glad.
If normally I'm not slamming my head against a wall, I'm
right,
going to do it twice as much now.
Exactly, yeah. So, but I appreciate you kind of stepping in and helping us out here so we could get this done. So, you know, before we dive too deep into Thursday's ceremony, which you covered at the Staten Island Zoo along with some of our other colleagues, I wanted to just kind of ask you about your thoughts on Groundhog Day before you started working at the Advance. So, you know, we're both native Staten Islanders. We're both from here. We've known who Chuck is. We've known about the ceremony, but I didn't really realize how big of a deal it was until I started working here, and we do the annual coverage and we send out photographers and social media people and reporters, and, you know, the news stations show up with their big cameras and all of this kind of stuff. So how have your thoughts on Groundhog's Day kind of evolved throughout the years?
So when you're a kid, it's kind of like Santa Claus, where it's really, really exciting, and then after a while you kind of outgrow it. Now I'm a father. I actually just came back from paternity leave, so a lot of it is now me thinking about it like, oh, I wish my daughter could experience it the way that I did. You know, for the young kids, it was one of those, it was one of the best things, and they braved the cold. There's been colder days than this one. It was 20 degrees today, but there have been times where it's been way colder, and they've braved the temperatures and had hot cocoa and whatnot. Obviously, it's a little different, and I guess we'll get into that a little bit later, but I guess COVID kind of changed a lot of things.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that, but I think you make a great point in terms of the having kids kind of changing your experience with it, right? Because, you know, I've covered this before in the past, which we're going to get into a little bit, but you go there, it's super cold, and these little kids are all jumping around, they're singing the silly little song that they have for Chuck, and they're, you know, mommy, I can't wait, look at the groundhog, and the parents are like, ugh, but, you know, they do it for the kids, and so it is really that type of event. So it's sad, and we'll get into this too, that they haven't really been able to bring it back in full force yet like they have in the past, but it is one of those types of things where, like, you love it when you're a kid, you grow up a little bit and you're like, oh, what are we doing here? And then you're like, oh, now my kids would really like that. They can yeah, exactly. Yep. It does come full circle like that. So let's talk a little bit, and you mentioned this, about what it's like to cover Groundhog Day. So I've drawn the assignment in the past. It's almost kind of like a rite of passage here at the Advance.
We always send like the people who don't know any better.
Right, yeah, so. Or the people who are new hires. Sometimes there's an intern out there mixed in to help out, which I always think is funny. But you know, it's a very early start. It's often very cold, but usually, you know, it's a cute ceremony and it's a fun assignment, all things considered, when you think about some of the other types of things we have to do here at the paper. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of your past experiences covering the event and kind of what that's been like?
So let me start with, I'm not a morning person at all.
Same.
So, and now I'm, you know, coming from a little bit further away. I used to live right by there. So I grew up in the bottom of like Toad Hill area. So it's only like a 5-minute drive. Now I'm coming from Jersey. Now I have my daughter. I have to make sure she's babysat. So what that means is it's an extra hour or so on top of what it would normally be. So my brain doesn't wake up until, noonish.
Until after the ceremony.
Right, usually, and then you just kind of hope for...
hope you came back with some good photos.
You go through the cadence and hope that everything kind of worked itself out. But it is very cold. It's no matter what it is, it's pitch black. It's pitch black when you get there. You enter through like a back gate kind of thing, so it's not like through the front entrance. I guess it's a little different that when it was open and full to the public, but it was a back gate thing today. I walked in with Shayna McLawrence. We got yelled at by a couple of bald eagles. That was the first. That was our experience. We're like, oh, okay, that's
that'll
there.
Wake you up.
Yeah, that's there, and that's the first thing you're staring at. But then we worked our way around, and then you waited for the ceremony to kind of come around.
Like I mentioned, I've covered this in the past, and our editors usually tell us to be there around 5:30 in the morning, right? Which is crazy. I mean, the ceremonies usually starts around 7, so I understand when
it never starts on time either.
Well, no, nothing ever starts
Right.
on time in New York City. Even the Groundhog is late. So, and the mayor doesn't even show up anymore. Usually, the mayor is the one that people are waiting on, but we don't even have him showing up anymore.
I don't think that after that whole debacle, and now we mock it over and over again.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any benefit now. You can only make it worse.
Right.
You can't repair that.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. But just from my experiences, you're getting there at about 5:30 in the morning. It's the beginning of February, so it's dark, it's cold, it's pitch black, as you say. I remember the first time I drew the assignment, it was actually like it was less than 10 degrees outside, and so I'm just waiting there. Finally get in, finally try to set up, get your little spot. Then, of course, the TV camera crews show up late and they try and take your spot from you. They're jostling for position with their cameras because their job is apparently more important than ours, in their minds at least. So it really is kind of like it's tough in that regard. It's early, it's cold, it's whatever it is, but then they've got the hot chocolate. They've usually again, not right now because of the current circumstances, but they usually got all the kids around. Everybody's bundled up, everyone's having a good time. So it's a tough assignment in some ways, but in other ways it's just kind of a fun thing to do. But we talked about this, we mentioned this a little bit, but over the past few years the zoo's been forced to kind of alter the experience and the ceremony because of the pandemic. So can you walk us through kind of like I think actually you had mentioned that you covered the last Groundhog's Day before the pandemic, right? So
in 2020.
Right, in 2020, which was just, a couple months before that started really, breaking out. And so what are kind of the key differences between how the ceremony used to be back in the day and then what they've kind of had to do over the past few years?
Well, I think I'm keep in mind I was still bright-eyed and bushy-tailed then.
Right.
I was still freelancing, and it was like it was before my other job at the time. Mm-hmm. So I jumped at the opportunity, and I think the first thing when you're walking in and you see all the kids really, really excited and they have the little Chuck dolls and things like that, it changes like your tone. When you're looking, much like right now, like normally you'd at least be talking to a person back there, but we're kind of staring into a wall.
Right.
It's a lot of that. So a lot of it kind of feels like it becomes like a show, like you're doing it for a live stream. Obviously, there's cameras there. From my perspective, the cameramen are always in the way. It makes it
always
very inconvenient for trying to get multimedia and photos and video. They sectioned us off this time, and it was in a different section than it normally is. Normally, it's wide open in front of. I guess it's what's the normal area? The children's.
Yeah, kind of in the back by that back entrance that you had mentioned. You
Right.
kind of go in that back Broadway entrance and you make the right, and there's that bigger kind of plaza
Right.
over there where
It was
they
not that.
usually hold it. No,
it was not that today. And
they brought you guys right over to the actual Groundhog exhibit, right?
Yep, and it was right next to a fountain too. So I mean, we were all huddled up in one section. And I saw some of the comments coming in on the Facebook Live. It's like they hear the fountain, they're like, "Turn it away."
Oh my!
It's like we really don't have too many options there. So.
Yeah.
As far as the ceremony goes, I mean, I think that it was missing an element without the kids, without the music. It just felt a little bit different, and it's the best that they can do, but it's hopefully not one of those things that's just going to fall to, it's like, oh, we did it this way. It didn't cost us money or anything like that, resources. It's kind of a thing that we can kind of just keep doing it. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that's not the route it's going. Looks like there's optimism that it's going to kind of go back next year. So that's what they were talking about. This is kind of the last time that we have to kind of put up with this stuff.
We'll be right back. The Mayor of Maple Avenue is a powerful multi-part podcast about Sean Sinisi, a victim of former Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky, who was arrested 10 years ago for numerous child sexual abuse charges. The podcast series is written and hosted by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Sarah Ganim, who takes listeners into the world of addiction rehabilitation, where society can be quick to celebrate the consequences for abusers while not addressing the needs of their victims. Subscribe now to The Mayor of Maple Avenue wherever you get your podcasts. I feel like it's got to have, lost some luster in that way, right? Because in the past, not only were they, inviting in some of the local school kids that helped to track the weather in the coming days, which we're going to talk about, but they also, it was legitimately open to the public. People could just show up. And so there were times when I was first covering it back in, 2018, I think was one of the ones that I had covered, where there are hundreds of people there,
absolutely.
Legitimately. And now it's kind of sad that you're seeing, the current state of affairs that they have to do it with, limited people, just whoever that they invite essentially to be there for the ceremony. So it doesn't have the same kind of feel to it, I would imagine,
right,
as it has in the past. But tell me a little bit more about Thursday's ceremony. Who was there? What were people talking about? And lastly, and maybe most importantly, what did Chuck have to say about the upcoming weather?
Well, so Ed Burke, I feel like he's paid for this. I think he has this date circled on his calendar.
Oh yeah, he's Mr. Groundhog. I think.
He wasn't short on his Groundhog puns. Obviously, just about every politician came in there and mentioned the De Blasio debacle because it's the most famous thing. Unfortunately, I guess in some ways it might have been the best thing to happen to the Groundhog, because now it gets extra attention when it typically wouldn't have.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ed Burke, who is at all of these types of events. He really eats up all of the animal content I found on Staten Island. He's always got a good pun for you. He actually, I believe, wrote a children's book, right, about...
I didn't know that.
Oh, actually. Really? Yeah, I think it's called... I have to... don't fact check me on this, guys. It's something along the lines of like Sunny Day and that like the girl's name is Sunny Day and she's keeping track of the weather, and it's like a little kid's picture book, and it features Staten Island Chuck. And when I was there in 2018, 2019, whatever it was, they were showing some things. They were selling it in the zoo bookstore. So that is something that he is obviously very passionate about. But I'm curious, were there other kind of elected officials there? And as we mentioned, we did not see the mayor, which is not surprising.
Right.
But who else was in attendance for Thursday's event?
Charles Fall was there, Councilwoman Camilla Hanks, Councilman Carr, Assemblyman Tanusis, and obviously Ed Burke. So
that's
from
actually
the borough president's office.
Yeah, pretty good turnout. And so what did they have to say, or rather, what did Chuck have to say about the weather? We've had. We had this long streak of no snow that finally came to an end earlier this week with just, we got like a half an inch, but I guess that counts.
And then it was gone.
Immediately. But, we've had generally, unseasonably warm weather up until this point, real lack of snow. So what did Chuck have to say? Does he think that that's going to continue? Are we going with an early spring here?
Well, as opposed to his Pennsylvania partner there, he's calling for an early spring. He has a streak of 13 straight successful predictions, which might be controversial. I think the school is disputing one of the years along those lines, but generally speaking, he's accurate about 80% of the time, according to the zoo, as opposed to Punxsutawney Phil. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Punxsutawney Phil. It's really
Phil.
A mouthful.
Right, who's less than 50%.
Yeah, I think I saw somewhere that Punxsutawney Phil is at like 39%.
Yeah, at that point, just give it up.
Right. Why are we still doing this, right? But no, yeah, Chuck has had this kind of incredible record, whether what your thoughts on how accurate he is or who's making these decisions here, if Chuck's really the one making the calls. But they do say that Chuck has been accurate about 80% of the time. And this is dating back to 1981. So this it's not a small sample size here. It's not like it was like 4 out of 5. This is, decades of prognostication. So they say, that's another thing. This is the only day of the year I ever heard people use the word prognosticator. 364 days a year it does not get used, but then on Groundhog Day, it's everywhere.
Well, there's your challenge for another one of your transit articles.
Right, yeah, I'm gonna have to fit it into something else.
Listeners of the podcast will will appreciate it when they see it.
They're going to see it and be like, there it is. There's the reference. But yeah, he's been very accurate with it. And, in the past, they've worked with some of the younger students across the borough to kind of track whether or not he was right or wrong. And so can you tell us a little bit about, that partnership and how that's worked, the ways that they've kind of determined whether he was accurate or not?
Well, I mean, they use a basic thermometer, and they said how many days over 40 degrees, and they calculated it that way. They're stepping it up this year. They have actually an AP environmental class from Susan Wagner, who just got a weather center kind of put together. I'm pretty sure they're using it for much larger
projects than this. Yeah.
But they're doing it the same exact way and tracking it, and on March 20 or whenever the first day of spring is, March 20, they're gonna tally it and see who was right. So.
Yeah, and so I guess technically in that way, if you're doing it based on regional weather and stuff, there are chances that Punxsutawney Phil and Chuck could be right. I mean, if Chuck is right based on if on Staten Island it's above 40 degrees 30 out of the 40 days, then he's right. But what about if in Pennsylvania it was below 40 degrees for that many days? So then are they both right, even though they had different predictions? I mean, it's really
just put them together and let them fight it out.
Exactly. Again, it's not really meant to be the most scientifically accurate thing in the world, but it's something that's fun and it's something that's cute for the kids, and it's been obviously a big annual tradition here. And so I'm curious, kind of what would you say is your favorite part of Groundhog Day at the Staten Island Zoo? I have a couple in mind myself, but I'd like to let you go first.
I mean, I was big on the guy who just passed away. I don't know how long ago, but John Spransreb, when he would play the horn, and he would decked out in that red suit and the hat, and to me that always stood out every single time. And unfortunately that he passed away, and that's gone. So that even when they come back to that full thing, to me it's going to be missing something. It's going to be missing an element. I thought that was like one of those cool things because it really made it feel like an official ceremony, something different.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I had in my mind one which we had kind of mentioned already, but is all of Ed Burke's puns. I mean, those always make it for me. He is very good at what he does. And then the other one, which we also missed out on this year.
You're going to bring up the song.
Oh, I'm going to bring up the song.
I was waiting for the song, but I think it might have been on the live stream.
Oh, maybe. They probably played it. Okay, so for our listeners who are not aware, Staten Island Chuck has his own song.
I can attach to YouTube. If it's on YouTube?
Oh, yeah, it's on YouTube.
I'll attach to YouTube for
you. It'll be in the show notes. I was going to advise everyone to go check it out. It is hilarious. It gets stuck in my head all the time. Me and my coworkers, we used to play it in the office when we would get back from the ceremony because it was just so silly and catchy. It's this local musician who does kids music. He plays at birthday parties and stuff like that. I think his name's Patrick. I believe the full band is Patrick and the Rockassilly Band instead of the Rockabilly. But it's very good content. It's so silly, and I would highly recommend that people check that out.
And that's his day. I mean, it's him, Ed Burke, and Chuck. Those are the
those are the big ones.
You take away that day, what do they have?
Right. So let's, we've mentioned this obviously throughout the podcast, and to no surprise because this is the big thing everyone thinks about with Groundhog Day on Staten Island now. But we had the drama with former mayor Bill de Blasio in 2014, where he goes to the ceremony. He's supposed to be, holding the groundhog. The groundhog kind of squirms out of his hands. Also, de Blasio is wearing these very silly oven mitt-looking things because, actually, in 2009...
I think he always wears those, but just it just happened to be he was picking up a groundhog that day.
No, the reason he had to wear them was because in 2009, when Bloomberg was mayor, he tried to kind of coax Chuck out of his cabin, and Chuck bit him on the hand.
Right.
And so then the zoo's like, okay, we gotta protect the mayor. So let's give him these big oven mitts that say Staten Island Zoo on them. So then de Blasio's holding the groundhog. It squirms a little bit. He drops the groundhog, and then a few days later, the groundhog dies. And so the zoo actually has to release a statement saying that it's unlikely that the groundhog died as a result of the drop. But, you know, de Blasio was never really able to shake those allegations.
No.
He's for the rest of his tenure as mayor, I feel like the two things that Staten Islanders remembered him for were dropping the groundhog and eating pizza with the fork and knife. Those are the only two things. Once he did that...
Where I used to work, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's Staten Island for you. It's a very small world.
But it was funny because I just went to I saw Staten Island the musical, and I don't know if you know about it, but it was narrated, or the narrator is the ghost of Chuck.
Oh, really?
That de Blasio dropped, yeah.
I did not know that. That's very
funny.
funny.
It was actually very funny.
And then the other thing is that it wasn't actually Chuck. That was the other thing.
Well, it's yeah.
Well,
it's like it's not really Santa, right?
Right. It's like when you're it's like when your kid's goldfish passes away and you go put another one in the bowl before he realizes. But yeah, so it was a different
Charlotte
groundhog. Charlotte, yes, a female groundhog who was standing in for Chuck. And the only reason any of this came out was because of the whole dropping incident. Like people were
the scandal gets released.
The New York Post is reaching out to the zoo with interview requests, and they're doing all this stuff. So it was just such a silly kind of crazy thing that happened. Obviously, R.I.P. Charlotte, right? We don't want any dead rodents here, unless it's a rat and it's Mayor Adams. In which case, I actually saw a very good tweet today. It was like, Mayor Erik Adams, he talks all this stuff about wanting to kill the rats, and he had a great opportunity to kill a rodent today, and he didn't show up.
They can't make up their mind.
Right, yeah, pick a lane. But so, yeah, that's something that I feel like is always on people's mind. Were there any references to that at today's ceremony? Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of the new people, they're not from here, so I had to explain this. I was trying to, brief them between Priya, who wrote the article, and Shayna. And I'm explaining, the first thing I mentioned was the de Blasio thing. And then they're like, are you sure it's going to be mentioned? I'm like, it's going to be mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, especially now that he's out of office. Right. I feel like in the past people were like a little hesitant to make the joke.
Staten Island never held back on
That's fair. Yeah, it's a full send at this point. But hopefully nothing that crazy, went on Thursday, right? Although I know that there were kind of some challenges that you and some of our reporters were kind of experiencing due to kind of the different setup that they had going on.
Yes,
you want to talk a little bit about that?
Hopefully that was the last time it was in that, that area. A lot of times we're kind of limited, and especially when there's more national attention or, local attention, when other news stations start to pop up, they start to, box us out. And it's kind of first come, first serve, and then, that sometimes that doesn't mean anything because they have to get the reporter in there. And so it was definitely challenging when you're at the mercy of their live stream. So I'm literally staring at their videographer on one side, and all to make their live stream perfect. You kind of roll with it, and that's kind of the job, right? So.
Yeah, exactly that. I imagine that you were still able to get some good shots in there, and kind of our reporters were able to get all the stuff that they need. But it can be difficult, especially when, as you said, they were holding it in a smaller space. You've got a lot of people there. They were shooting it. The zoo themselves were shooting it for the live stream, right? And then you have all the news outlets, and you have, we had, 3 or 4 people there just on our own as we
set the full court press over,
right?
And then on another note, and I mentioned this earlier with Shayna. I guess when you watch it on like Fox or something, they don't, you watch it on TV, they don't necessarily have the opportunity to like react. So if it's if something's weird's happening, if there's weird sounds like in the background, they don't get a chance to react. But they were not holding back on Shayna. I saw it. Sometimes I felt bad. They're like, get closer. I can't hear it. It's like, we can't really do anything. You want me to throw my phone? I don't know.
Right. Well, yeah, that's kind of, people don't always understand the limitations of our jobs in some ways, right? So I'm sure it can be difficult for her, someone who's kind of filling in to help out on the social side of things, to be doing our, Staten Island Advance live stream on our Facebook, I imagine it was, right?
Yeah.
But
and especially on
that.
Their phone, because you don't have like, the long lens or anything
you don't have
pull
those
closer, or microphones.
Yeah, they're like, can you go closer? You try and zoom in and you just get a grainy, 8-bit groundhog in there. I don't think
you get the NES version.
Yeah, you can't even see the shadow, let alone him see his own shadow. It's a silly kind of event, but it's something that Staten Islanders have been doing for a very long time, and people tend to enjoy. And so I'm hoping that, in the next few years, we can kind of get back to that full open to the public event that we had kind of grown accustomed to. And then hopefully one day you can take your kids there as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me, Jason, and I look forward to. I usually
next
say I look forward.
there.
Yeah, I usually say that I look forward to having you back on soon, and maybe that will happen. But what I really want is to have, our normal guests and to have you behind the camera doing what you do best.
Easier for me.
Absolutely easier for all of us. Well, thank you for listening to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene. If you like what you've heard, please make sure to rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and visit SILive.com for the latest on all these stories and more. Thank you for supporting local journalism.